Let's be honest. When a woman has options, most men panic. They lean in harder, text faster, give more, and all of it feels logical until it backfires. Because the moment you start competing, you stop being a choice and start becoming an applicant. And attraction doesn't grow in interviews. If you've ever felt like you were doing everything right, but still waiting to be chosen, this isn't about bad timing or bad luck. It's about emotional leverage. Women don't choose the man who proves himself the most. They choose the man who doesn't need to. There's a quiet shift that happens when a man stops auditioning and starts standing still. Once you see how that shift works, you won't need to chase, impress, or outperform anyone ever again. And that's when the dynamic finally changes. In this video, I'm going to break down exactly why men lose leverage the moment they start competing and how to shift the dynamic without games, manipulation, or pretending to be someone you're not. This isn't about tactics, it's about internal position. If you're ready to understand the psychology beneath attraction, hit like, subscribe, and let's step into the part most men never see, where the power actually changes hands. The moment you start competing for her, you've already given something away, and most men don't even realize it. Competing sounds logical on the surface. You try harder, you show more interest, you prove why you're better than the next guy. But psychologically, that move quietly rewrites the entire dynamic. Because when you compete, you're not just trying to win her. You're positioning yourself as an applicant. And the second you do that, she becomes the evaluator, the chooser, the prize. Power doesn't drift, it snaps into place. What makes this dangerous is how subtle it feels. You think you're being confident, proactive, intentional. But what she feels is pressure, imbalance, an unspoken hierarchy where you're working to earn something she already assumes she can withhold. Women sense this shift instantly. Not logically, not consciously, but emotionally. The tone changes. The energy tightens. Suddenly, you're explaining yourself more, seeking reassurance, watching her reactions a little too closely, and she's leaning back, not because she dislikes you, but because the dynamic no longer feels equal. Here's the part most men miss. Attraction doesn't grow from being evaluated. It grows from tension between equals, from curiosity, from the feeling that the man in front of her isn't trying to win, but also isn't afraid to lose. The men who create desire aren't the ones stacking credentials or outperforming rivals. They're the ones who don't need to prove their value in the first place, not because they're arrogant, but because they're grounded, self-contained, unmoved by the need for approval. When a man stops competing, something strange happens. The spotlight shifts. Instead of him asking, "Am I enough?" she starts asking, "Why isn't he trying to impress me?" That question is the beginning of attraction, because the man who doesn't chase validation communicates one thing clearly without saying a word. He has something to lose, a life, a center, a sense of self that doesn't rise or fall based on her decision. And that's the truth most men avoid. The harder you try to win her, the more you signal that you have nothing else at stake. Most men don't lose her because they're bad men. They lose her because they're painfully predictable. They follow a script they never consciously agreed to, but somehow learned along the way. Compliment her constantly. Reply the moment she texts. Explain yourself before she even asks. Adjust your tone, adjust your schedule, adjust your boundaries. All in the name of being nice, safe, or different from the other guys. The problem is, this is exactly what the other guys are doing. From her perspective, it all blends together. The same words, the same timing, the same emotional posture. She doesn't feel special. She feels processed. And when something feels familiar too quickly, the brain stops paying attention. Predictability doesn't create security. It creates boredom. When a man is overly agreeable, overly available, overly eager, he removes all tension from the interaction. There's nothing to wonder about, nothing to decode, nothing to lean into emotionally. He becomes easy to understand and even easier to overlook. This is why being nice without depth doesn't work. Not because kindness is unattractive, but because surface-level niceness has no edge, no polarity, no weight. It asks for approval instead of inviting curiosity. She's seen this version of you before, even if she's never met you. That's why some men are shocked when she pulls away despite them doing everything right. They mistake effort for impact. But attraction isn't built on how much you give. It's built on how you make her feel when you're not trying to control the outcome. The predictable man tries to remove uncertainty. The grounded man is comfortable inside it. And here's the uncomfortable truth. When you follow a script designed to please, you stop being a person and start being a performance. She doesn't reject you because you lack value. She disengages because there's nothing left to discover. You're not invisible because you're boring. You're invisible because you're familiar before you're felt. You're not playing the wrong role because you're flawed. You're playing a role she's already watched too many times. There's a misconception that quietly ruins attraction for a lot of men. They hear, "Don't be needy," and assume it means becoming cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable, acting unbothered, playing it cool, pretending not to care. That's not what this is. Real non-neediness has nothing to do with indifference. It has everything to do with stability. A needy man isn't defined by how much he likes a woman. He's defined by how much he needs her response to feel okay. You see it in the small behaviors most men dismiss as harmless. Texting because silence makes him anxious. Rereading messages looking for hidden meaning. Feeling relief when she replies and tension when she doesn't. On the surface, it looks like interest. Underneath, it communicates something else entirely. "I need your attention to regulate myself." That message doesn't inspire closeness. It creates pressure. Women aren't repelled by emotion. They're repelled by emotional dependence, because dependence signals fragility. And instinctively, women look for emotional strength, not someone they have to steady. When a man's mood rises and falls with her availability, she feels it. Not as logic, but as weight. An unspoken expectation she didn't agree to carry. And slowly, without meaning to, she pulls back. Now here's the shift. A man who doesn't need her attention isn't distant. He's grounded. His life doesn't pause while he waits. His sense of self doesn't hinge on her reaction. He enjoys her, but he isn't incomplete without her. That energy feels different immediately. There's no grasping, no urgency, no quiet fear underneath the words. And that creates space for curiosity, for desire, for attraction to grow naturally. Because when you're emotionally self-sufficient, you stop asking her to choose you. You simply show up as you are, calm, present, unpressured. And that sends a powerful signal without a single explanation. "I want you here, but I don't need you to be okay." That's not weakness, that's strength. And the irony most men miss is this. Not needing her doesn't push her away. It gives her room to come closer. Because not needing her doesn't make you less invested, it makes you more attractive. Most men believe women remember words, compliments, clever lines, big gestures. They don't. What women remember, what actually stays with them, is how they felt in your presence. The emotional state your energy pulled them into. Calm, safe, seen, or tense. Pressured, drained. This is where emotional imprinting happens. A woman doesn't consciously decide to attach feelings to a man. Her nervous system does it for her. When she consistently feels grounded around you, her mind begins to associate that state with you. Not your looks, not your status, the feeling. Safety is one part of it, but not the boring kind. Emotional safety isn't about fixing her problems or reassuring her endlessly. It's about allowing her to exist without pressure, without having to perform, without needing to be on. This is where most men get it wrong. When she has a bad day, they rush to solve it, to cheer her up, to say the right thing, to smooth it over. On paper, it sounds supportive. In reality, it subtly tells her, "Your emotions are a problem I need to manage." And that doesn't feel safe. It feels monitored. Holding space is different. Holding space means you don't rush her out of her feelings. You don't minimize them. You don't try to turn discomfort into something tidy. You stay present, calm, unreactive. You let her be messy without needing her to clean it up for your comfort. That's why real beats perfect. When a woman feels she can show up imperfectly and still be accepted, her body relaxes. Her guard drops and the experience becomes memorable. Not dramatic, not intense, just deeply grounding. Over time, That feeling repeats, and repetition is what creates psychological anchors. Her mind starts linking emotional relief with your presence, your voice, your energy. At that point, you're no longer competing with other men's effort. You're not even competing with their attraction. You're competing with how she feels without you. And that's when the dynamic shifts in a way most men never reach. Because now you're not just someone she likes. You're the place her nervous system wants to return to. At that moment, you stop being just a man in her life. You become an experience. One of the fastest ways a man quietly erodes attraction is by being available. All the time. Not present, not attentive, available. There's a difference when you're always there, always ready, always responding, always adjusting. You send a message most men never intend to send. Nothing else in my life requires me. Scarcity isn't about disappearing. It's not about delayed replies or manufactured distance. Real scarcity comes from having a life that already has structure, momentum, and priorities that don't bend on demand. A man with purpose doesn't need to create distance. Distance already exists naturally because his time has weight. When your schedule revolves around her availability, she never has to wonder where she stands. She knows she's the center. And paradoxically, that certainty removes tension. There's nothing to lean toward, nothing to risk losing. But when you have your own rhythm, your goals, your discipline, your commitments, something subtle shifts. You stop orbiting her life, and she starts noticing how she fits into yours. This isn't about withholding affection. It's about not abandoning yourself. A man who cancels his workout, rearranges his plans, or neglects his own progress to stay accessible doesn't look devoted. He looks unanchored. And that lack of anchor creates emotional instability. Even if he's kind, even if he's sincere, scarcity born from self-respect feels different. It's calm, unforced. There's no announcement, no explanation, just consistency. You show up when you say you will, and you don't when you won't. That's when she starts to feel something unexpected. Uncertainty mixed with respect. Not fear, not anxiety, curiosity, because now she isn't asking, does he want me asking where do I fit in his life? And that question matters. A man who is busy building his life isn't hard to reach. He's simply not always available. And that quiet distinction is what keeps attraction alive. Because the most compelling men aren't chasing attention. They're occupied by a life worth showing up for. Here's the shift most men never make. Women don't lack options. They lack experiences that feel different. Most of the men around her are interchangeable. Not because they're bad, but because they offer the same emotional texture, same conversations, same compliments, same dates, same predictable energy. Nothing stands out long enough to linger. Becoming the experience means you stop trying to be the best choice and start being the only feeling she can't easily replace. That begins with owning your contrasts. Depth is attractive because it's layered. A man who's driven but grounded, confident but reflective, playful but serious when it matters. Those contrasts create dimension, and dimension creates intrigue. She can't fully label you, and the mind always chases what it can't neatly categorize. Then there's unpredictability, but not chaos. Unpredictability isn't about being inconsistent or confusing. It's about breaking patterns before they become boring, not texting at the same emotional temperature every time, not defaulting to the same type of interaction, not following the unspoken script of how things are supposed to go. Small, memorable deviations matter. A thoughtful check-in that isn't needy. A plan that feels intentional, not rehearsed. A moment where she thinks, this feels different, even if she can't explain why. And finally, emotional intensity. Attraction thrives on movement, shifts in tone, lightness that gives way to depth, laughter followed by stillness, conversations that don't stay on one flat emotional line. This isn't drama, it's contrast. And contrast is what keeps her emotionally engaged. When a man can guide emotional transitions naturally, he becomes stimulating without being exhausting. There's energy, but also safety, excitement without instability. This is why mystery is powerful, but confusion isn't. Mystery invites curiosity. Confusion creates anxiety. The experience you offer should feel rich, not disorienting, grounded, not erratic. And when all of this comes together, something changes. She stops comparing you to other men, not because you're better on paper, but because comparison no longer makes sense. You're not occupying the same category. At that point, you're no longer a choice among many. You're the one she struggles to explain, because the most compelling men aren't the most impressive. They're the ones who leave a feeling no one else can recreate. There's a moment in every dynamic where the power quietly shifts, not through confrontation, not through demands, but through absence of panic. Most men believe attraction grows when they lean in harder. When signals get mixed, they push for clarity. When distance appears, they rush to close it. They think urgency keeps connection alive. In reality, urgency exposes fear. Human nature doesn't chase what feels guaranteed. It chases what feels like it might slip away. Not because of manipulation, but because uncertainty activates attention. When you stop overinvesting, something subtle happens. You match effort instead of exceeding it. You don't rush to stabilize every emotional wobble. You allow space where space naturally belongs. And when you don't panic, she starts to. Not consciously. She doesn't say it out loud, but her nervous system notices the shift. You're no longer reacting. You're no longer chasing reassurance. You're calm in moments where most men scramble. That calm creates a question she can't ignore. If he's this steady, does that mean he doesn't need me? And from there, another question follows. If he doesn't need me, could I lose him? That's where attraction intensifies. This isn't about playing hard to get. It's about being genuinely okay with any outcome. When mixed signals appear, you don't demand explanations. When she pulls back, you don't rush forward. You let actions speak for themselves because clarity doesn't come from pressure, it comes from contrast. When you stop proving, she starts evaluating. When you stop chasing, she starts noticing. When you stop reacting, she starts feeling the distance you're no longer afraid of. And here's the key most men miss. If she doesn't respond to this shift, if she doesn't lean in when you lean back, you haven't lost anything. You've gained information. You learn whether her interest was real or just comfortable. Power doesn't come from control. It comes from self-rust, from knowing that you don't need to force a connection to keep it alive. Because the moment she realizes you're steady enough to walk away calmly, something flips inside her. Not fear, respect. And respect is what makes attraction last. There's one principle that ultimately separates men who stay stuck from men who are chosen. And it has nothing to do with confidence tricks or ultimatums. It's the willingness to walk away. Not as a threat, not as a test, not as a dramatic gesture meant to provoke a reaction, but as a quiet boundary rooted in self-respect. Walking away doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about yourself to not overextend where there is no reciprocity. It's the understanding that your time, energy, and emotional investment are valuable, and they're not given out unconditionally. Most men stay too long because they're afraid of loss, afraid that if they don't hold on tighter, everything disappears. But what they don't see is that clinging doesn't preserve connection, it erodes it. When you're willing to step back calmly, something powerful happens. The dynamic clarifies itself. Either she leans in because she values what you bring, or she lets go, revealing that the connection was one-sided all along. And in both cases, you win. Because walking away isn't rejection, it's selection. You're choosing where you invest rather than waiting to be chosen. This is where real respect is born. Not from compliance, not from endurance, but from standards. A man who can say without anger or resentment, I only invest where there's mutual effort, communicates strength at the deepest level. He doesn't chase validation. He doesn't negotiate his worth. He doesn't beg to be seen. And that's what makes this principle so confronting and so effective. The man who is ready to lose her is the man she fears losing most. Not because he's manipulative, but because he's centered. He knows he'll be okay either way. And that certainty is something no amount of competition can replace. At the end of the day, this was never about outworking other men. It was never about saying the perfect thing, proving your value, or fighting for a position you were never meant to audition for. The moment you stop competing, something fundamental changes. You stop negotiating for attention. You stop shrinking to be chosen. You stop chasing a decision that was never yours to control. Because the truth is simple and uncomfortable for a lot of men to accept. She may have options, plenty of them, But only one man stands in a grounded position. Only one man doesn't need to convince her. Only one man isn't afraid of losing what doesn't meet him halfway. That man doesn't win because he's louder. He wins because he's centered. You don't need to become colder. You don't need to become harder. You don't need to become someone else. You just need to stop abandoning yourself for the sake of being chosen. When you no longer audition, the dynamic flips. When you no longer need validation, attraction breathes. When you choose yourself first, she finally has something real to respond to. And if she doesn't, you didn't lose anything. You saved time, energy, and self-respect. If this shifted the way you see attraction, power, and your own position in relationships, subscribe. Not out of habit, but because you're done playing the same losing game. Leave a comment if there was a moment you realized where you'd been over-competing, over-giving, or undervaluing yourself. And share this with a man who's still trying to win by trying harder when what he really needs is to stand still and reclaim his ground. That's where the choice actually begins.